Hello and welcome to Cope and Read. I read it so you don't have to. I'm Mac with some cheese, and we are back again today with Excuses, Cope, Untruths, and Manipulation by Southpaw. And where we last left off, we were on chapter 1.11. Southpaw was the only one with this recording. Now, a bit of bookkeeping before we begin. You will see in the screenshot we have Marcus Spixru, and then down below we have Sky Spixru. In case you've forgotten, Sky is trans, Sky was Marcus, but now Sky is Sky. With that bookkeeping out of the way, let us begin. Not only have Jeb and company erroneously insinuated that there was evidence in this recording that said recording was Kira's only chance of having evidence against Chase, and that they were telling me to send it directly to Kira as opposed to publicizing it, but also they have insinuated that I was the only one with this recording and they were powerless to do anything with it themselves. Yet, as shown in their doc full of screenshots, mirrored here, the recording was actually sent to them, just like it was sent to Kira. The I am suicide, Marcus Spixer at Southpaw, think you can send it before Friday so I have full context for ecom? Southpaw replying to Marcus, yes. Okay, technically this only shows me promising to send the recording, if only there was proof that I did send it to her and that she confirmed receiving it. Southpaw at Sky Spixru, I'm getting a WeTransfer link for that Chaseface call, sending it through send transfer to your email. Jeb the Goblin Bush, that was the worst Peacemaker EP NGL. Jeb the Goblin Bush, finale is like a 4 now TBH. Characters are great, but the world building and plot is an oof. Sky Spixru replying to Southpaw, I got it, thanks. Oh, so why didn't you publicize the recording or send it to Kira, Sky? The one of Chase's, quote, admitting all of it, unquote. Sky Spixru, yes, thank you, Shandy, you're so based. This is all because I told him to release the recording. I hate how he's putting it on Mahler to call Chase out when he has the evidence of Chase admitting all of it. Fuck's sake, I'm so tired of this shit. Don't worry, they answered this way back in the day. They were, quote, waiting for my approval, unquote. The top half of the message below has been redacted so that the relevant half can be the focus. Jeb the Jeb Bush, quote, I'm sure you're also so outraged about the Chaseface call not being released, considering your free association with someone who couldn't even be arsed to tweet out a public condemnation of him like I did, which I guess didn't matter because you decided that wasn't enough, as well as the fact that that recording is also in Sky's hands, and as far as I'm aware, she has reservations about releasing it too, unquote. Also need to tackle this. 1, she didn't release it prior because she was waiting for your approval. Now, ignoring the fact that no such approval was ever asked to begin with, this is a flat-out lie. Right after Jeb admitted that the call didn't have anything of value in the 2/17/2024 message shown on Chapter 1.1, this exchange took place. Southpaw at Sky Spixru, out of curiosity, do you plan on playing any of that recording on ecom or no? Jeb the Hedgecock Bush, Marcus isn't going to be online, but due to Kira's tweet, we're only going to briefly touch on the situation rather than explore it in and such, just because we're aware of it, and due to it, we'd be cutting ties. So no, they weren't, quote, waiting for my approval, unquote. That is just yet another lie from Jeb, told in order to deflect any responsibility for him not publicizing the recording himself if that was so important to him, and falsely put it on me, because the actual reason he gave at the time for not playing any of the recording on ecom was due to Kira's tweet from just a few days before, shown at the very beginning of chapter 1.7. Kira, the screenshot we've seen many times before, but we're going over it again for posterity's sake. Life's been crazy. I'm glad I got my closure. Thank you everyone for the support. I cannot tell you how much it means to me and for my healing process. I won't be talking about Chase anymore. I just want to move on. Not because of any quote-unquote approval he was waiting on for me, which he'd already implicitly had when I asked if they were planning on playing any of that recording on ecom, and not because of any supposed risk it would pose to a legal investigation. Jeb never appealed to that here, which also outright debunks what Jeb later said here. Jeb the Fudge Hog Bush, obviously this is an OOC snippet, but I feel like the clarification would be on what they would mean on releasing. Because at least for me, it was always to Kira, not to the public. Then it'd be on her to do whatever she wishes with it because obviously that's her abuse story. And again, obviously OOC snippet, so you may address this. I think it's fair to not do it publicly for legal reasons also. I do feel obviously never should have been on SK's server, either, especially when that has had a history of recordings go on and it being a public server at the time. Nearly 2 years before this excuse, Jeb very clearly said that he and Sky were completely on board with the publicizing of the recording if they had my quote-unquote approval, which they did, for them to do so. Jeb is a liar through and through. There's no getting around this. But setting that aside, let's just call this excuse what it is. Cope. Hey, name drop. If Sky believes that this call contains quote-unquote evidence that verifies Kira is telling the truth and what Chase did was not only immoral but criminal, as they had put it, this isn't some drama, this is illegal activity, and it involves a victim. And that releasing such a call would have helped Kira, as they claimed it would have, and they had no concerns whatsoever of jeopardizing an official police investigation into Chase, which they very clearly did not, then having access to this quote-unquote evidence, but waiting on the approval of the very person you are scolding for not releasing it themselves, yet you have that approval anyways, makes you just as complicit. Of course, because their core complaint about the recording having valuable evidence is objectively nonsensical, there's nothing wrong with not releasing the call themselves. Problems begin to arise when they start high-horsing about the call not being released, under the belief that it is of the utmost importance to release it, but then doing nothing themselves while also having access to this recording. I feel the need to illustrate a fairly important point, even if this may feel like a tangent. Just level with me for the next 3 paragraphs. When it comes to scoring a conviction for a crime, the prosecution needs to successfully argue that 2 criteria were met by the accused, actus reus and mens rea. Actus reus is merely referring to the act itself. Let's use shoplifting as an example. Someone picks up an item from a grocery store, not a very large one. Let's say it's a small bag of M&Ms, one that could easily fit in one's pocket. They never stick it in their pocket, they just grab it while checking out, but they don't pay for it. The cashier neglects to spot the candy being grabbed in the first place. The person puts the M&Ms in the bag with items that they have paid for, and they walk out of the store with a bag of M&Ms they have not paid for. This seems like a fairly cut and dry case of shoplifting. The act has certainly occurred, but what if the person who grabbed the M&Ms meant to pay for the candy did not realize until later that they hadn't, and then later returned to the store to explain what happened before paying for it? Perhaps they were distracted or they were in a hurry. Regardless, even if they objectively left a grocery store with a small bag of candy that they did not pay for, the intent, which is the mens rea refers to, isn't there. As such, this would not be prosecuted the same way it would if someone were to more deliberately stick the candy in their pocket to smuggle it out of the store, which could then be caught on camera. Inversely, mens rea can be proven, while actus reus isn't. For example, suppose you misplace your umbrella at work one day. The next day you see an umbrella at work that you believe belongs to someone else and it looks identical to yours. Because you have the same umbrella and you haven't told anyone you've lost it yet, no one would know if you simply swiped this identical looking umbrella and took it home. And that's probably because, unbeknownst to you, this identical looking umbrella is your umbrella, which you discover later when you open it and find your initials written on it. No crime of umbrella theft has been committed, therefore you can't be prosecuted for it in a court of law, but you did have the intent of stealing a person's umbrella and the willingness to carry through on that intent. All this is to say that these characters who are making a huge mountain out of a molehill about this recorded call with Chase not being sent quote unquote sent to Kira, or as they actually demanded, publicly released, while also having access to this same recording and are likewise not posting it publicly or sending it to Kira as they believe should have been done, have demonstrated something similar to the latter scenario. No wrongdoing was committed in the first place if you think about it, but they certainly believe it was while being quite content to do nothing more about it than just morally grandstanding from a high horse. Jeb fancies himself as a righteous crusader against moral bankruptcy when he is more like a 5-year-old at the dinner table who tattles on their older brother for not having his eyes shut while the family was praying before starting their meal. There's nothing wrong with that. Jeb just insists that there is, while lacking the self-awareness to realize he's equally complicit in the thing he's trying to tattle on another for. Or maybe he just doesn't believe in having a consistent standard. Quote, rules for thee, none for me, unquote, seems to be a consistent pattern with this character. In all seriousness, though, we all know the real reason for why they aren't releasing this recording of Chase, quote, admitting all of, unquote, what he was accused of, because he doesn't. These people are just making shit up to get mad about. Jeb the Jeb Bush. This doesn't provide much of what we didn't know. A lot of the abuse stuff wasn't really confirmed. Wayne Manor overreacted to the lolly thing based on how Chase explained it. The contents he stats in that VC either weakly supports the accusation, which in fairness, however, to give BOD, this is some heavy shit, and with an already heavy situation, not also as useful. The contrast of how Jeb gives the benefit of the doubt here, while none at all just a few days prior, and to this day, is really interesting. Was he actually giving the benefit of the doubt here that he has since refused to give, or is it just lip service? I'm leaning towards the latter, personally. I don't have any reason to believe that Jeb was ever sincere in most of his interactions with me at this point. After all, he did say in his doc, this was the key straw that made me confident that there will be distance between our community and him. Now, I can expect Ecom's answer to this to be something to the effect of, quote, well, we saw that Kira said they didn't want to push it any longer, and we respected those wishes, unquote. This does not account for them choosing not to take any further action with this recording they had once Kira expressed they wanted to resume pursuing justice. Probably because they lacked any of the same proactivity I had in actually doing anything to support Kira. And 2 weeks passed between their tweet announcing they had wanted to resume getting Chase brought to justice, and me seeing it, so they certainly had a window where they could have beaten me to give Kira that recording themselves, or perhaps had even deleted their copy of the recording and inadvertently locked themselves out of doing Kira that favor in the first place. Kira, I've grown and I'm back. After a long time to develop as a person, I've become stronger than ever before. I know I said I wouldn't talk about Chase anymore, but the fight isn't over. I'm not done. I want justice. And you know, it wasn't even hard to get in touch with Kira if you had just tried. When you click on the link to their Twitch or their Twitter, their Twitch channel links to their Instagram, and if you click on that, you'll find that they link to their Discord server. Sure, you have to click a couple of links first, but you don't have to do any more work than I did to get in touch with them in the first place. I guess this was too much effort for Jeb to do. Kira's Twitter page, you see a link to their Twitch. Kira Oni is offline on their Twitch page, link to their Instagram, Kira Oni Instagram, link to their Discord. By the way, Jeb, just because someone accepts all pronouns doesn't mean they don't have a preference. Kira Oni, they, them. So not only did Jeb and Sky have access to the same recording that they could have publicized if they believed it should have been, but they even acknowledged that there wasn't anything in it that could be useful, yet they wanted to get on my case for not immediately jumping to publicize anything while completely absolving Mahler and his friends of any culpability for doing even less, even though this was Mahler's audience doubting Kira, and Mahler's word would have been much more effective at dispelling the rumors among his audience that Chaseface was being falsely accused. And although I was wanting to help, and that is why the watch party and SK server happened in the first place, all of which they are ignoring or omitting to suit their narrative, even after this had been clarified to them. It's another obvious case of these individuals holding me to a double standard they hold themselves and their idols to. Quote, good faith for me, none for thee, unquote, is pretty much their mindset. 1.12, Kira was not thought of. This section of Jeb's quote-unquote improv can be best summed up as, quote, Kira this, Kira that, unquote, in which Jeb spends the entirety wringing his hands about my handling of this situation in an extremely judgmental manner, yet now, thanks to everything gone over up to this point, we know for certain that Jeb did not accurately recollect the contents of this recorded call with Chaseface in the first place, did not accurately recollect what he and his friends were pressuring me into doing, was not giving the full picture on the nature of this conversation about Kira to make himself and his friends look better, and also did not give the full picture as to what all the options were that he and his friends had at their disposal. The most charitable explanation for Jeb and company spending all this time upset with me over this, as hypocritical as they were, was that they were just really, really concerned for Kira. Jeb cares so much about Kira that he surely would have at the very least contacted them regarding my behavior, right? Kira's feelings on this matter would certainly matter most to them, and if I treated their situation so callously, it would warrant Ecom's reaction as well as the statement from Jeb. It very seriously comes across that Kira was not thought of. Except they predominantly were thought of, Jeb. But since you clearly don't want to take my word for it and value Kira's word so much, why don't we go to someone who puts a kibosh on this matter for good? In chapter 1.7, while trying to understand how Jeb could have concluded that, quote, Kira never got that recording, unquote, I stated that, quote, I can't know for certain, unquote, that Jeb didn't reach out to Kira before typing up this high-horsing word salad of a document. Well, I have a confession to make. I lied. Hello, Kira. Now, before I hear any yelling about dragging Kira into this, I would like to highlight that, as shown in Chapter 1.7, I have been in contact with them since 6/16/2022, but it was not until 1/12/2024, just 2 days after being sent this doc by County Stake, and in turn being made aware that Jeb had still latched onto his narrative of these particular events, that I ever made it known to them that these assholes have been using their situation with Chase to character assassinate me. Up to this point, I have tried the best that I can to de-escalate this situation entirely in private because I wanted to specifically prevent them from being roped into any of this nonsense because I understood just how destructive these people are to anyone who ends up in their wake, and I also did not want to risk them developing any type of potential survivor's guilt because they were being used as a means of smearing someone with false accusations. I did everything that I could to prevent this call from ever happening, but because of my significantly damaged reputation thanks to Jeb and SK's actions since September 2023, and the discovery of this quote-unquote improv doc from Jeb making it clear that Jeb/Ecom were not going to give up on these lies anytime soon, and would in fact weaponize their newfound status and social credit in the eyes of SK's community, I was now at the end of my rope. The only options I had were to either take all of this lying down or set the record straight in the only feasible way that I could and finally let Kira know what I've been dealing with the entire time I've been in touch with them, and naturally, I preferred the latter, although I went about it in the most ethical way possible by giving Kira a heads up that we'd have to talk about Chase in a call that I would have to record. Southpaw, you think you might have a window for a call on Friday? Kira, I might. What time were you thinking? Southpaw, what time works best for you? I'm flexible. I need to disclose something before you agree to it. Kira, yeah? Southpaw, the subject of this call is sensitive. It has to do with Chase. It may need to be recorded. I am currently facing serious allegations about the fact that I didn't rush to present the recording of the call to you back in February 2022. This is being framed as me having no concern for you whatsoever. Kira, people still care? Even I don't give a fuck anymore, crying face emoji. Southpaw, it's being weaponized against me. Kira, sure, I'm cool with Colin about that. So, on 1/12/2024, I had a call with Kira in which I showed them this very section of Jeb's doc without even showing them anything like what's in Chapter 1.5, and the results were predictable. They mocked how Jeb framed this entire situation, called Jeb and company fucking losers, and expressed disappointment that these guys going after me, and only me because, in their own words, I had done the most to help them during this situation out of everyone, including Mahler. The only part of this call that may even slightly help substantiate Jeb's recollection of this story is when I asked Kira if they did ask for other people's help with collecting receipts on Chase, as gone over in detail on Chapter 1.3.6, and they said they might have. There is no positive confirmation from them, and they're working off of a hazy memory of a 2-year-old event that they've mostly moved on from and are only really talking about again because Jeb and company haven't moved on from it and are now smearing someone who Kira believes is being unfairly targeted. However, based on a pattern of Jeb and company regularly deflecting any form of responsibility onto a scapegoat, my honest conclusion is that Kira never asked for any evidence in the first place, and Jeb and company are trying to essentially pass the blame onto Kira for them being prompted to do their weird, pushy peer pressure shown on Chapter 1.4. Given the countless other details Jeb has gotten completely factually inaccurate, it seems far more likely that they chose to start their peer pressure of their own volition, especially as their own receipts don't cite any tweets from Kira, but rather what was being said about them on Mahler's Discord server. Marcus Spixru, Southpaw, don't you think the recording with Chase might be worth releasing, seeing as Kira is being called a liar and shit? Southpaw, who's calling her a liar, SK his mother, Marcus Spixru, EFAP podcast talk saying she's got no proof or whatever. Would kinda help to make sure this community doesn't suffer from Chase's behavior moving forward, I guess. This is completely at odds with how it was framed in Jeb's doc. Southpaw informed us he had this evidence, and we saw clearly that Kira was asking for any evidence that someone may have. We all collectively said to provide this to her. The screenshots are linked here. Please note that Marcus Spixru is now Sky Spixru. She's trans. So to finish off what I went over on chapter 1.3.6 for good, I am going to rule this particular claim from Jeb a lie. Circling back to this first call with Kira, however, feel free to go through the entire recording of them talking with me. It's very fascinating, especially to hear straight from Kira that all of Jeb's posturing and feigning outrage on their behalf is 1. Speaking for Kira without actually getting their input, 2. All for naught once they were inquired about it, and 3. Targeting the individual that Kira themselves said was the most helpful to them while completely ignoring the bigger YouTuber who Kira feels disappointed in for not doing nearly as much to help them as he could have with his bigger platform, and even agreed with every single part of this message that Jeb and company got so ass-blasted about. Southpaw, you know, Mahler, I know all kinds of things now. I had a little chat with your old ex-pal Chaseface a couple weeks ago as he was seething and molding about you and Wolf disavowing him. Had to sit there for 2.5 fucking hours hearing shit that made my stomach churn in all sorts of directions just so I could see what he'd say if he believed he had a listening ear. Thank you, addiction to JCS. And boy, oh boy, did he sing. He sang and sang and sang. Wowzers! Cannot say that much of what he told me about either of you surprised me, but I was still glad to hear that you cast him out after finding out what he had done. I'm well aware that you know he admitted to everything, for as much as he tried to weasel out of really being held accountable for what he did, and now I can't help but see you have a substantial portion of your audience that believes his ex is a liar. Seeing as how your ideal response to having your inaccurate criticisms criticized by someone you just thought was a coattails riding weirdo anyways, Chase's words, not mine, is to essentially threaten to drop some doc quote-unquote exposing them. Maybe now that you know Wolf's ex's best friend ever went and ran to me within hours of you guys disavowing him, maybe that will give you the drive you need to use your platform to actually take action and stand up for Chase's latest victim. Because after all, we both know you care oh so much about victims of sexual abuse, right? You've read it right. This message that Jeb and his friends are so outraged about, the one from chapter 1.5.1, officially approved by Kira, the person they claim to be so concerned about that they didn't even bother asking for their input while trying to blast me for, quote, not thinking, unquote, of them. I suppose the thought never crossed their minds that Kira would approve of this message, which is highly ironic because they want to pretend to be the ones who have Kira's best interests at heart. And hey, since Jeb wants to boast from his high horse about how much more he thought about Kira than I did, let's talk about whether his excuses for Mahler line up with Kira's perspective. So, why is this problematic? Firstly, it was handled completely with crass and little actual consideration for Kira. This isn't some drama, this is illegal activity, and it involves a victim. This needs to be taken with sincerity and very carefully. Southpaw was prompted repeatedly to even provide this evidence to the victim and focused on Mahler. Even during the message, he goes on about the doc on him. It's like, we are dealing with sexual abuse here, don't make this about you. He was also prompted on the community thoughts on Kira, not the fact that Kira is being publicly lied about and you could help a victim. This should be a selfless act, one of virtue. Instead, it boils down to EFAP. It's so petty and it's so insensitive. You see, Jeb's moral outrage against me is motivated by the fact that he is just so concerned about Kira and people accusing them of smearing Chase. He cares so much that it makes you wonder, does he have the same energy for Mahler? Considering this is Mahler's audience on Mahler's server alleging that Kira is lying about Chase, and Mahler was doing nothing to quash all of this talk about them going on his server, whilst having far more context for Chase admitting to things which corroborated with Kira's claims than I did. As suggested earlier, if Mahler had supported Kira more vocally, his audience would have most likely listened to him and gotten off Kira's back, yet he didn't. And because of a lack of explanation from Mahler himself at the time, which supposedly annoyed the hell out of Jeb and Sky while this was happening, not so much, however, that Jeb was unwilling to consider a shady quid pro quo deal. So where exactly is that energy for Mahler now? Well, I'll tell you, it's nowhere. Jeb ceased caring that Mahler wasn't publicly saying anything because he unquestioningly accepted the first explanation he heard from the man. You see, that screenshot shown in Chapter 1.11 that justifies Jeb and Sky not releasing the recording themselves is not the only part of the message in which Jeb makes up some lame excuses for why he has a double standard when it comes to how various parties handled this situation with Chase and Kira, as he provides his reasoning for why he doesn't show any of this same energy towards Mahler these days, and why he doesn't like that message I wrote up at all, and his reasoning is telling. Not merely because it exposes some form of moral bankruptcy on his part, as if I needed any further proof of that by this point, but because of how it highlights a brazen double standard on his end. Jeb the Jeb Bush, in the underlined parts, he said he won't go public because it will cause shit for Kira. He also never recorded the VC, so even if he had gone public, he didn't have proof, which would have hurt Kira more. I never took issue with you publicly condemning it either. I praised you for that. First off, if you read that message carefully, I was calling Jeb out for having no problem with Mahler not being arsed to tweet out a public condemnation of Chase as I did. Much of Jeb's response to this was, quote, well, Mahler privately condemned Chase, unquote, as if that does anything to support Kira when his community is doubting the veracity of their allegations, meaning that the point that I was making had sailed over Jeb's head. Not off to a good start. Next, regarding the very last sentence in that screenshot, quote, I never took issue with you publicly condemning it either, unquote. I must emphasize that in no part of this particular section in Jeb's doc does he acknowledge that such public condemnation of Chase ever came from me. Even if I didn't bring this quote-unquote evidence, which Jeb admitted at the time wasn't evidence, to Kira soon enough for his liking. No attempt is made to be like, quote, well, at least Southpaw did this, so I can give him some credit where it's due there, unquote. Nothing of the sort exists to add any possible shades of gray to the story he wants to tell himself and other people. This alone is quite scummy of him, but what's really interesting is that he was fine with me publicly condemning Chase, even though I didn't provide any quote-unquote evidence when I did, yet he justifies Mahler not publicly condemning Chase because, quote, it will cause shit for Kira, unquote, and he didn't have proof to provide with it. So going public would have, quote, hurt Kira more. So by his logic, wouldn't not providing evidence when I publicly condemn Chase have also hurt Kira? If that's the logic he's committing to, why is he praising me for doing anything publicly without having my quote-unquote evidence loaded in the chamber? What's more is that I was working on finding something in the call worth publicizing, yet I'm a bad person because I wasn't working fast enough on it? Or was it because I was cracking jokes about it like Jeb did earlier that same day? Jeb the Jeb Bush, big dick energy is oozing from me, Rin, Sky Spixru, okay Jeb the Jeb Bush, rock hard my guys, Sky Spixru, remove Jeb please, Jeb the Jeb Bush, slap down on the table break, shut up Marcus, thank you Neb, Jeb, not saying that, Naira Kyle, Cope and Seethe, hi Beckett, Jeb, I'ma get Chase on you, fat sweaty 28-year-old chasing you, Sky Spixru, get Chase to chase her, Naira Kyle, he wouldn't care, I'm over 18, Jeb, Neb is a bad Pingu, Nebula, gif of Pengu eating a fish, Jeb, you deep-throating cock. If you're struggling to discern a logical connection between how Jeb portrays my handling of this situation and how he portrays Mahler's, it's because such a connection doesn't exist. The boy has a double standard, plain and simple, and not only that, but if you may recall the screenshot of my DMs with Mahler that I posted way back on Chapter 1.7, Mahler gave a completely different reason for not saying anything about Chase at the time. Mahler, I gave my word that I wouldn't post anything about what he said in that call in order to get him to talk about all of it, and I take promises like that very seriously, but I said he will be excommunicated and that will be public because how could it not? And when people understand that EFAP believe the allegations or have reason to, and they see the things that were put out, they will be able to put two and two together. So there's two major holes that I have to address between Jeb's message and Mahler's. Let's talk about the first one, which purely has to do with Mahler's reasoning and his message directly to me, conflicting with the reason that Jeb gave just a few days earlier. Mahler didn't appeal to the idea that saying anything in defense of Kira would magically somehow, quote, cause shit for them, unquote. He appealed to simply being a man of his word. This is more logically sound reason for not saying anything at the time. I personally don't condone it in this context, and looking back, I think it's pretty stupid, but it makes far more sense than the reason that Jeb claimed Mahler gave him. I couldn't really trust anything that Jeb says, so there's a decent chance that, for some odd reason, while trying to defend Mahler, he lied about Mahler's reasoning for saying nothing at the time to make less sense than what Mahler actually said. The reason for doing this could be any number of things. It could have been that Mahler gave a different answer than he gave me, which was weaker, and Jeb knew it was weaker, and steel-manned him in order to help him save face, which we know he isn't above doing, given what can be safely concluded from Jeb's choice to lie about this entire situation in public on 7/27/2023. Ziggs, Hostman's Lounge, you said you got in a, quote, private call with him, unquote, that, quote, made your skin crawl, unquote. And to my knowledge, you haven't turned the content of that call to the authorities, even though you're so adamant about leaking calls related to a spat over a TV show. Jeb the Super Butch, being there is as a part of the events, Southpaw immediately disowned Chaseface and did provide the evidence to a victim. We all advised him to do this because people were victim blaming her. The reason not to the authorities is because that's the victim's decision. This is something I wanted to clear up because this topic is very personal to myself. I don't want any mistruths about it, especially when there is a very difficult topic for many. The statement you have said is incorrect. Or for all we know, Mahler gave Jeb the exact same reasoning that he gave me on 4/2/2022, but Jeb, being the gigabrain genius that he is, or at least hopes for others to see him as, incorrectly concluded that Mahler's reasoning was weaker than what Jeb could come up with, and tried to steelman his reasoning, which would still leave us with Jeb being a liar and an idiot to boot. That is the best faith interpretation in Mahler's favor here, and yet this man is trying to defend Mahler's lack of action during this situation. However, both sets of excuses for Mahler, including what was given directly from Mahler himself, completely fail to account for what Kira, the person whose perspective on this situation should matter the most, would have wanted. In our second call on this matter, Kira mentions that Mahler going public would have given them much appreciated backup from people trying to accuse them of being a gold digger or a liar, and that Mahler didn't need to have recorded his own call with Chase, as all he would have needed to say to encourage his followers to stop spreading rumors about Kira on his server is that he had seen Kira's publicized receipts per chapter 1.3.6, was convinced by them, and that Chase wasn't going to be appearing on EFAP anymore, which technically wouldn't have violated his promise to Chase to not publicize anything said in their call at the time, because at the time, Kira had not yet posted their receipts, which brings us to the second aforementioned hole in this message from Mahler. Had he said anything publicly about Chase at the time, that would have actually been him following up on what he claimed to me he said to Chase at the time. I said he will be excommunicated and that will be public because how could it not? And when people understand that EFAP believe the allegations or have reason to, and they see the things that were put out, they will be able to put two and two together. Additionally, Mahler and Chase had their call sometime before Chase reached out to me in DMs on 2/1/2022. Chaseface show, sorry about before, I wasn't really sure what was going on. February 1st, 2022, 2:01 p.m. And Kira did not post any actual evidence against Chase until 2/4/2022. Kira, February 4th, 2022, evidence of Chase show allegations, sorry, needed to re-upload because some were restricted links. For context, my friend has more screenshots due to them unfriending each other. I have limited them due to Chase blocking me on all platforms. TW, Google link, upset spending time with friends, Google link, bullying friends, Google link, cutting of friends, Google link, homophobia, Google link, manipulative/abusive behavior, Google link, pedophilia. This would have been a very sly, very clever way of Mahler finding a loophole to publicly condemn Chase, as he told Chase he would have, yet for whatever reason, reason he didn't do it at the time, which is not in dispute thanks to the excuses that Jeb gave for it, and if he ever done it, since as Pat Rapt outlined on chapter 1.1, it wouldn't have been in the most accessible public manner, meaning this quote, public excommunication, unquote, of Chase that Mahler said would happen was only done technically. Either way, Mahler promising to not publicize anything Chase said in their call at the time does not adequately counter that point, and therefore isn't a valid argument, it's just cope. And read. The idea that Kira would have wanted to see someone like Mahler say something is a no-brainer. Yet I suppose Jeb was so blinded by his bias for Mahler, the one that he insists he doesn't have, that he was genuinely under the impression that they'd somehow agree with this rationale. Jeb's excuses for Mahler are even more absurd when they're immediately followed by him praising me for publicly condemning Chase, yet I didn't publicize any parts of the recording when I did. Ergo, publicizing any evidence is not a requirement for publicly condemning Chase. All that Mahler had to say was that he had good reason to believe Kira and tell his fans to not go after them. But he didn't even do that. If Jeb is going to posture this much about me when I took action at several points to publicly help and support Kira more than Mahler ever did, then Mahler's inaction should be indefensible to him. However, that is banking on Jeb's worldview having any degree of logical consistency, and that ship appears to have sailed ages ago. On the subject of that second call, by the way, Kira calls out Jeb's weird excuses for what Chase said about Lolicon in that recorded call outlined in this message shown in chapter 1.1 here. Jeb the Fudge Hug Bush, Wayne Manor overreacted to the lolly thing based on how Chase explained it. I despise lolly and think it should be illegal, however he is right on it being philosophical on what it can do in rehabilitation. Furthermore, Jeb's excuses for Mahler not saying anything publicly about Chase, even though Mahler apparently said that Chase would be publicly excommunicated, are entirely at odds with what he said in response to snippets of Chapter 1.4 being shown to him on 2/25/2024, as if what I highlighted in Chapter 1.11 was not already the final nail in the coffin for his excuses he gave here. Jeb the Fudge Hog Bush. Obviously, this is an OOC snippet, but I feel like the clarification would be on what they would mean on releasing, because at least for me, it was always to Kira, not to the public. Then it'd be on her to do whatever she wishes with it, because obviously that's her abuse story. And again, obviously OOC snippet, so you may address this. I think it's fair to not do it publicly for legal reasons also. I do feel obviously never should have been on SK's server, either, especially when that has had a history of recordings go on and it being a public server at the time. Jeb says that now, yet this was what he was saying 2 years ago. He also never recorded the VC, so even if he had gone public, he didn't have proof. If Jeb didn't want anything to be publicized at the time and he was consistent, then Mahler's alleged excuse of not having any evidence to publicize shouldn't have been an adequate excuse for not saying anything to quash rumors about Kira among his audience in Jeb's eyes, especially when Mahler honestly would not have needed to publicize anything or even divulge exactly what Chase said in his call with him and Wolf just to say, quote, I believe Kira after looking at their receipts, unquote. However, if that excuse was satisfying to Jeb, then this means that Jeb was perfectly fine with publicizing evidence and thought that not having such evidence was enough to justify not saying anything in support of Kira, even though he mentioned that he praised me for publicly condemning Chase, although he's clearly since been omitting that detail in his recollection of these events. So it's yet another nail in the coffin for his lie that he didn't want this recording with Chase publicized in the first place. You know, the thing about having steadfast principles and being honest and upfront about them is that you don't have to worry about keeping your story straight in the way you have when you lie all the time. Unless you keep a steady journal/doc of sorts, not like Jeb's quote-unquote improv, but an honest-to-God, quote, lie log, unquote, to keep track of what stories you tell, you're going to end up contradicting yourself. And if you lie often, you will contradict yourself often. The reason why this doc is so fucking long is because these contradictions in logic in Jeb's narrative never, ever, ever end. Additionally, remember the point in chapter 1.3.6 where I linked to a doc with all those receipts that Kira had originally published on 2/4/2022, and I was rather vague with my means of recovering those receipts? That would be through Kira themselves, and you'll even see the video where they recover those receipts during a call with me reading across most of this very chapter in this doc, where they quite literally mention working on recovering all of those receipts as I read out this chapter of the doc to them, a process that they frankly wouldn't have had to put themselves through if it weren't for the fact that I was forced into getting them involved here thanks to Jeb's insistence on dragging their name into this, which makes it funny for Jeb to excuse Mahler not publicly supporting them on the basis that it would, quote, cause shit, unquote, for them. This isn't what I was hoping Kira would ever have to do, because why do you think I went 2 full years without telling them this was going on? It's because I didn't want to rope them into this drama. The reason why I had to talk to them about this was that Jeb personally took out most of my network of support that could help me out with this, and left me with no other viable option to clear my name but to get Kira involved. So it should be pretty clear at this point that Jeb will go soft on Mahler for doing objectively less than I did while being both unreasonable and dishonest when it comes to me, and he will outright contradict the logic that he had embraced at the time when it suits him. The simplest observation here is that Jeb is not being truthful when he says that he never wanted anything publicized. He and his friends did. There was no other way to read this message. They were copying and pasting over and over again. Nebula, releasing, and show others that Chase is indeed a fucktard. SK, releasing, and show others that Chase is indeed a fucktard. Naira Cairo, releasing, and show others that Chase is indeed a fucktard. However, setting aside the fact that Jeb is lying about what he and his friends were pressuring me to do at the time and what he meant when he got pressed on it by me, even before this contradiction was noticed, it's clear that Jeb has a hard bias and isn't operating on any sort of consistency or fairness. It's either the case that so long as he hates someone, he will contort reality so that he can justify his hatred of them, or so long as he is starstruck by someone, he is incapable of criticizing them in a manner that is consistent with how he criticizes others. And so long as Mahler provides an answer to a question that Jeb asks, Jeb isn't going to push him on that. So if Mahler gives Jeb an excuse that hinges on the idea that any public statement on Chase was dependent on him having some sort of evidence to publicize, that will be enough for Jeb, even if he wants to later argue that he isn't in favor of publicizing any evidence in the first place. In stark contrast, when he talks to me, no answer can ever be enough. It doesn't matter that I was trying to find something about the recording to release to help Kira, as he and his friends were pressuring me to do. It doesn't matter that Kira got that recording. It doesn't matter that that was done entirely in private. Jeb will still insist that none of this is done out of quote-unquote virtue, because he needs to find a way to drag conflict with me no matter what. That's why he's still yapping about this 2 years later, after having had ample opportunities to understand my perspective and drop this, including his issue with the message for Mahler shown in chapter 1.5.1, despite that being meant to help Kira in the most reasonable way possible whilst doing apologetics for Mahler, not saying anything to publicly support Kira that don't even have any sense to Kira themselves. For someone who wants to virtue signal so much about, quote, Kira not being thought of, unquote, he seems to show no consideration at all for what Kira themselves would naturally think, because Kira's need/perspective take a backseat to Jeb's desire to weaponize the public's hatred of me in any way that he could to further vilify me, while also making himself look like a saint. To circle back to this, quote, it will cause shit for Kira, unquote, excuse from Jeb, I can't help but express skepticism for this excuse. Shouldn't this be the other way around? I'm pretty sure that if Mahler saying anything to publicly support Kira would have caused shit for anyone, it would logically be Mahler himself, thanks to what often happens when someone with an army of fans, especially if they are mostly male, is accused of something like what Chase was being accused of. Consider what happened to Mr. Beast after he publicly addressed his friend Ava Chris Tyson, being met with similar allegations. Mr. Beast Over the last few days, I've become aware of the serious allegations of Ava Tyson's behavior online, and I am disgusted and opposed to such unacceptable acts. During that time, I have been focused on hiring an independent third party to conduct a thorough investigation to ensure I have all the facts. That said, I've seen enough online and taken immediate action to remove Ava from the company, my channel, and any association with Mr. Beast. I do not condone or support any of the inappropriate actions. I will allow the independent investigators the necessary time to conduct a comprehensive investigation and will take any further actions based on their findings. This is actually the ideal way to address a situation like this, if you're honest, if you have nothing to hide. However, since Mr. Beast posted this tweet, the increased amount of attention that he put onto this situation has directly led to more people inspecting the situation with Tyson further, and what they've unearthed has resulted in Mr. Beast receiving further backlash, such as the revelation that he knowingly had a registered sex offender on his payroll. It makes you wonder why Mueller couldn't even say anything about this about Chase if he has nothing to hide. Of course, that's not evidence of anything, it's just food for thought. If I were to apply an, quote, innocent until proven guilty, unquote, mindset in good faith, the explanation for Mueller saying nothing like what Mr. Beast said about Tyson is literally nothing deeper than just not wanting egg on his face regarding platforming a pedophile on his podcast, which always makes one look bad to some degree, even if done unknowingly, and Mueller just didn't want the embarrassment if he could help it. So, in conclusion, this reasoning that Jeb gave that it would, quote, cause shit for Kira, unquote, seems to be using Kira as a sort of shield, because I imagine that they would have only received more support from Mueller's audience if he had expressed support for them, as opposed to supposedly receiving more direct harassment from them. Even DeLorean expressed this at the time that Jeb sent this to me. Southpaw, ha ha ha, screenshot from DMs the Jeb, wow. DeLorean reacting to Southpaw, Mueller can still be like, quote, I was in a call with Chase, he showed me the proof, so you should believe Kira, unquote. It will still help. Of course, then everything will shift to Chase to show evidence, which is fine. I doubt anyone will negatively harass Kira aside from a cruel few. This is beyond stupid, honestly. One final funny observation about this excuse, which makes it really far-fetched to believe Mueller actually said it, is that it implies that Mueller had such little faith in his audience that he would expect them to harass Kira even if he were to publicly support them. I don't think Mueller's even stupid enough to believe it wouldn't make any sense as an excuse, but now we know that Jeb is, so that's great. This doesn't really say anything we don't already know because, as demonstrated across this chapter, Jeb is an idiot, and not even an honest or unbiased one at that, given his willful misreading of my message on chapter 1.5.1, despite having had numerous attempts to accept what it clearly states beyond the few secondary details. He would rather be laser focused on that he can ignore the overall point of the message, which is why it's so funny for him to claim this. My mom is a fucking reet. Something tells me that Southpaw is lying to try and seem innocent, when the truth is he prioritized EFAP over a sexual abuse victim. It seems as though the person who, quote, prioritized EFAP over a sexual abuse victim, unquote, is Jeb. I'm the one who had an accurate idea of both what Kira would have wanted and what would have been best for them, which is why Kira approves of the message that Jeb and his friends take issue with, and, as shown later, will even say that my idea expressed in that message was superior to what Jeb and company were both demanding and are now pretending they were demanding. Jeb simply has too much of a hard bias for EFAP to be truly objective on the matter, leading to an acute case of cognitive dissonance when he tries to make others believe that he has Kira's best interests at heart. The reality is that he didn't, but he convinced himself that he did because he started with the conclusion that I didn't, then worked his way backwards from there out of pure spite, which is par for the course for an EFAP fanboy to do when someone doesn't like their podcast. I think that if your admiration for some e-celeb is at the point where you are this easily persuaded by excuses for them to not publicly support someone like Kira, and you bend over backward to lie about and defame someone who did offer that person their support, even after they tell you that's what they did, you need to take a step back and rethink whether you have an unhealthy attachment to someone who honestly doesn't care about you, and the fact that Kira clearly doesn't share this perspective fawning over Mueller's infallible wisdom is just one of the many reasons why this entire paragraph, and especially its conclusion, is just so asinine. Then, to make matters worse, he goes to a public server with hundreds of people having the chance to see this before the victim herself. All of them dissected her story, her situation, her trauma, under the guise that they would give her the important bits, as if they are to decide what is relevant to her, as if they decide the context she should have. Then, during the call, to make joke tweets and go on tangents about EFAP. Variously, seriously comes across that Kira was not thought of. If there was any truth to Jeb's claim that I wasn't thinking of Kira, I wouldn't have done this watch party with anyone to begin with, let alone on a public server where anyone could see what I said during that call with Chase, and based on just how eager Jeb and company were to spin this in the manner they have, despite the fact I was trying to help in exactly the manner they were urging me to. God only knows what the narrative would have been had this VC of the Chase call had been done behind closed doors, as they insist should have been. Quote, "Oh, of course Southpaw didn't want anyone to potentially see him saying anything suspicious in that call," unquote. That's what I would expect anyway, and I have every reason at this point to suspect that Jeb and company were poised to bitch and moan about that if it were the approach taken, as opposed to this VC on SK's server that they chose to act like the biggest drama queens imaginable about. They can say that's being uncharitable towards them, but what else am I supposed to think when their quote-unquote argument here is easily summed up with, "Oh no, the fucking public server with hundreds of people had access to this recording of Chase admitting to the things we were cracking jokes, and it is admitting this is about his drama with EFAP that only I'm being a prissy drama queen about, with my fellow grandstanding friends who I've nicknamed Piss Redacted Stick F slur and N-word, and Kira isn't being sent this recording by Southpaw Redacted and was never sent that recording. It's the end of the fucking world. Ah!" Given the degree to which Jeb and his friends have distorted this nothing burger to suit their narrative that is just dripping with malice and bad faith towards me, I can't even imagine a scenario where they don't find a way to do something like this, even if I did exactly what they are currently demanding I should have, especially when not only are they giving me grief for doing this publicly right after insisting I publicize this recording, but also I did contact Kira and provide them with the recording as they claimed they were insisting, and they have gone on to literally pretend that I didn't. If I wasn't thinking of Kira, I certainly wouldn't have kept checking up on their Twitter to see if they changed their mind about pursuing justice. I wouldn't have approached them directly to tell them what I knew. I wouldn't have shared with them the completely unedited call with Chase. I wouldn't be staying in touch with them to this day, and if I wanted any recognition for it, I certainly wouldn't have done all that in private. I would have publicized it before Jeb had any opportunity to force my hand by throwing these hefty allegations against me so I could prance around about how much of a good person I am. This can only mean that the real crux of Jeb's issue is that I don't share his recklessness, guns blazing approach in situations like these, which because of his short-sighted outlook can only mean that I didn't have a real concern for Kira. All this does is just gatekeep what the proper response to this type of situation is, with no concern for sincerely giving any benefit of the doubt whatsoever to anyone with a different approach, possibly because Jeb would have had a vested interest in finding a way to twist events so that he could throw me under the bus for the sake of his reputation, and considering that he is weaponizing one of the most serious situations one can ever wind up in so he can casually present potentially life-ruining allegations against me, it's become quite clear to me that this lunatic has no line he is not willing to cross to reach that end. In addition, they never reached out to Kira. They've only ever used this as a means to poison the well against me to various EFAP supporters or even friends of mine like they were trying to with Madvocate. Do you know what these two details imply? They imply that they don't care for Kira at all. That should already be abundantly clear based on the fact that they didn't bother to get Kira's input on this matter, but are instead using them, a person who was groomed and abused by Chaseface, and weaponizing their trauma to bludgeon me, someone who Kira would attest to being the most helpful and supportive person to them in this drama, for the sake of what is petty personal feud born of countless perceived slights and delusions, while accusing me of doing that and having the gall to pretend to be doing this on Kira's behalf. Had I jumped to conclusions as quickly as Jeb and company did, I would have assumed that Kira co-signed what they said here, which would have then resulted in me feeling betrayed by Kira because I did do everything in my power to help them, as Kira themselves will acknowledge, along with the fact that Mahler and the person who Jeb/Ecom are sycophantically defending did comparatively very little, especially when considering the degree to which he could have helped them had he done what both Kira and I believe he could/should have done. Who knows what rift between Jeb could have opened up between us as a result. Thank goodness that I'm not like Jeb and bothered checking with Kira directly before leaping to any conclusions. You know, the entire point of recording this call with Chase was in case he had anything that confirmed what Kira was alleging against him, and he spent the entire time denying most of it. What little that was partially confirmed, he downplayed severely, claiming that Kira was exaggerating what happened. Kira wouldn't come out with receipts for their claims until a few days after that call was had, after which point I was pressured by Ecom to publicize the recording, or at least parts of it, in the interest of helping Kira, which was a reaction to seeing what members of Mahler's server were saying about them, and although I did agree to that and was looking to that goal, Jeb and company have made completely arbitrary, hypocritical, and downright deceitful misreadings of what occurred my problem for 2 straight years, and in stark contrast to my decision with Mahler 2 months later from chapter 1.7, changing my perception of his handling of events in that time and motivating me to drop this entirely, Jeb has chosen to entirely rewrite events in his head to validate his hatred of me, unbeknownst to me. Jeb's grievances with me regarding this specific situation are all built on a mixture of delusions, rejections of Hanlon's razor, and details that he has either forgotten about or is deliberately withholding so he can stir up drama and make himself out to be a kind, sympathetic saint, when really all the evidence is that he is a posturing, self-aggrandizing twat who's not only no better than the person he dedicates his terminally online yet insignificant and worthless existence to faming, but also he's demonstrated himself to be tangibly far worse on a moral level. He's spent months smearing the character of the person who had Kira's best interest in mind every step of the way for no reason at all, other than the fact that he wanted to cosplay as someone more virtuous than he is. He quite literally has tried to take credit for the recording being directly sent to Kira by falsely claiming that that was always his and his friend's intention, followed shortly after by claiming that Kira was never sent that recording, which he knew was not the case. Jeb wanted to take credit for caring about Kira more than me. Meanwhile, I'm left the question, compared to me, Jeb, what exactly have you done to help Kira? Objectively speaking, you've used them behind their back as a means of smearing the target of your own petty asinine drama that you and your friends have spread to the EFAP audience, ironically proving yourselves guilty of the very thing you accuse me of doing, even though I am innocent of it. Most appallingly, in doing so, you have deliberately chosen to turn what should have been a straightforward issue into a ridiculously complicated and vitriolic one, which obfuscates the point. All that this unneeded noise does is shift the focus away from the actual problem, which is what Chase did to Kira, and makes it about whether I didn't do enough with what I did, even though I objectively did, or whether it was wrong to make light of the situation, even though it was never at Kira's expense, and it was outright encouraged by you at the time. Fucking hell, Jeb. Even after everything you and your friends did to demonize me, even knowing how hypocritical you all really were and inconsistent you really were in your application of your standard, all conversations I had with Kira about Chase all the way up to 1/12/2024 stayed entirely focused on what Chase did to them, not whether Mahler didn't do enough with what he knew or these deranged psychopaths who were hell-bent on using this situation as part of their crusade against me. However, now it's frankly not possible for me to keep the discussion confined to that. Because of this entire can of worms, I now have to address thanks to you poisoning the well against me, Jeb. All this is to say, nothing. You have done nothing to help Kira. I would argue you've done less than nothing because you left me no choice but to bring this bullshit up with them, And if it weren't for the fact that you felt the need to do this to make yourself feel better about yourself, you wouldn't have made it abundantly clear to any objective observer that you were the clear villain of this story, even though you had a huge head start with that nefarious looking, quote, I want these people to hurt, I want to twist the fucking knife, unquote, message from me that looks terrible on its face, until the context is shown that this message is about a group of dishonest monsters who've been hounding me over this nonsense relentlessly when I tried to have this resolved privately and wanted to avoid making any show of giving Kira the recording as they claim to have asked, because it was simply the right thing to do. In stark contrast, you and your friends have been spreading these lies to God knows how many people because you want to act like you are these bastions of selflessness and virtue champions of justice for Kira, who you don't even give an ounce of a fuck about. That's why when Kira tweeted this, Kira, life's been crazy. I'm glad I got my closure. Thank you everyone for the support. I cannot tell you how much it means to me for my healing process. I won't be talking about Chase anymore. I just want to move on. You and your fellow short-sighted drama queens threw your hands in the air and gave up, and decided to do no more than exploit this unfortunately timed tweet to help build your case to the EFAP community about what a bad person I am, someone who doesn't care about helping someone who was sexually abused by Chaseface. My mom is a reet. Something tells me that Southpaw is lying to try and seem innocent when the truth is he prioritized EFAP over a sexual abuse victim. In stark contrast, I would check in on Kira's social media irregularly. Sometimes it was a couple times a week, sometimes it was almost every day. Then there'd be stretches where I was too occupied with IRL stuff to check in with them because I know that people change their minds all the time. And just because they may not have been ready to have a look at this recording now, doesn't mean that would be forever the case. And once I was made aware that they were ready, I reached out to them directly. That's because I'm someone who cares about finding solutions. You and your company of fellow control freaks lack the drive to do anything but whine about things not being immediately reached, even after they absolutely are, because you just crave dragging out drama where you get to feel like the good guys, even when the observable facts make it look like your issue with me isn't really that I allegedly wasn't trying to help Kira, but rather that I was. To you, Kira is little more than a means to an end, which is why, although they were given the recording as you wanted, and you were even told this, you would just go on to jettison that information right out so you could continue weaving your narrative full of lies, even after you quote-unquote won in the public eye, and had successfully tricked a lot of people who know of my existence that I'm a rotten person thanks to what fragments of quote-unquote receipts you've shared. But what should Southpaw have done? It's quite simple. He should have messaged Kira. He should have said that he does have a call with Chase about the situation where he admits these. He should have offered for her to hear this and provide complete understanding and support to her. Not any of these utterly abhorrent and careless choices he repeatedly made. Despite multiple people telling him to focus on the victim, he didn't. You just couldn't help yourself but do as many victory laps as you have to try to rewrite history on something as sensitive and important as this. And in the end, because you managed to do that, because you managed to make as much drama as possible regarding trumped-up transphobia allegations, and I wanted to get to the bottom of those claims that you ended up making very publicly, we discovered this quote-unquote improv doc/quasi-journal that blows gaping holes in your entire narrative, that you wasted years of your pathetic life spinning this web of incredible lies. None of this drama would have happened if you had given your quote-unquote friend any basic benefit of the doubt, or considered if maybe you were being uncharitable for no reason other than personal spite. And the fact that you would take advantage of my misfortune in the court of public opinion to lie so you could self-aggrandize to this degree is not only depraved on a moral level, but also it speaks volumes about the degree of hubris that I'm dealing with here. Did you really think that your claims about this situation would never make their way to me? Did you really think that you could keep going on about this unimpeded because you'd be forcing me to choose between taking this all lying down or having to contact Kira? Did you really take me for the kind of person who does not have the fortitude, integrity, or backbone to push back against these sorts of lies told about me? And yes, this is what the entire narrative is. Lies. Even if Jeb somehow forgot about all these details, it would have been through him, willfully memory holing it away. He remembers just enough to write everything that he did about this whole debacle, but is his memory too poor to recall the various details that I brought to the surface? No, he knew. At best, he chose to forget so he could keep spreading the narrative he wanted to believe in. Lying to oneself by rejecting inconvenient facts does not mean that you aren't lying. These are lies. Jeb is a liar. No matter what quote-unquote skeletons he may try to pull out of my closet, no matter what messages of mine he pulls up to make me look bad, does not ever warrant lying about this situation to frame me as someone who doesn't care about helping victims of sexual abuse, so that he can then prompt others who don't know any better, have no conceivable way of knowing any better, to do his dirty work and spread shit like this about me. Batman villain. True, sexual harassment / rape is only a problem to Southpaw because it happened in Terriers, and he's upset that one of his likable characters got violated in that show, which is fine, but that's a standard you should apply with any victim. The purpose of this doc was originally going to be just about the claims that I'm a transphobe, but because of the research that I was doing to scrutinize Jeb/Ecom's accusations against me for that, in tandem with their need to rewrite history to make themselves look like better people than they are, I came across a golden opportunity to expose their cavernous lack of credibility and eviscerate them at a moral level. F-, ridiculous, apply yourselves. It seems like Jeb and his friends weren't satisfied by what damage they already caused for me by getting this narrative off the ground to the EFAP community in the first place and allowing it to swirl around for 2 years, thoroughly poisoning the well against me with their falsehoods, and despite multiple chances to have this settled privately, not just seen towards the very end of Chapter 1.5.1 and Chapter 1.7, when I informed Jeb that Kira was given the recording, they wanted to try and use this as a means to convince Madvocate to cut ties with me. Madvocate. She is still mad about the Kira situation. Southpaw, old fucking news. We already went the fuck over this. Madvocate, showing a screenshot from Madvocate. I feel the need to say this now because I have a cameo in Southpaw's video that I made months ago before Shandy brought up to have a call. Then the other day, Sky brought up the Kira thing and potential enabling of transphobia from SP, so I confronted him about it in case I needed to ask to remove my part. He showed me all the context on a call, and I'm a bit disappointed that this was being used against him. Also, the DeLorean/Katie thing was something I saw before Sky brought it up here, which I also don't agree with you on. Sky didn't add anything new that I didn't already see on Twitter. We can leave it at that or have a call, I don't know. But at the moment, I just want out of all this. SP can post his video, Ecom can post the remaining Flash reactions, I can post the remaining Madvo movies if you still give me permission, but after that, I have no idea what to do. Then, when that didn't play out in exactly the way that they wanted it to, it seems as though they had still latched onto their framing of events because they still felt the need to use this to cause as much damage as possible to me until they'd cause enough for someone to end up as collateral damage. Kira themselves, which only happened because things played out in a manner where they had to get involved. In tandem with an absolutely deranged, incomprehensible set of logic from Jeb and company, in order to give a complete picture of this quote-unquote logic from them, in the below paragraph, I'll be giving away a couple of details you'll be seeing from Jeb and company later on, namely shown in Chapter 1.13.6.1 and 1.13.7. So if you're confused about when I went into detail about something I include in the following, don't get flustered about it, just try to follow this if you can. Quote, the recording is a smoking gun, but also it isn't, so we aren't going to publicize it. But also we aren't going to publicize criminal allegations anyways, but also you should have publicized it, but also we were really telling you to give the recording to Kira because criminal allegations shouldn't be public, even though this whole thing started with Kira making criminal allegations in public, but also criminal allegations shouldn't be publicized, but also we were waiting on your explicit permission for us to publicize the recording, but also we didn't ask because we had to tell you 50 times to publicize it yourself, and you just wrote a message about Mahler, and no, it doesn't matter that the point of your message was to urge him to use as much bigger social standing and credibility than you had with his audience and do the very thing we were pressuring you to do just after we criticized him for not saying anything. Also, you did give Kira the recording, but also Kira never got that recording, and we couldn't have given Kira the recording ourselves because we didn't have any way of contacting them, but also we expected you to contact them somehow. Also, you did publicly condemn Chase without presenting evidence at the time, but also condemning Chase publicly without evidence would just cause shit for Kira, but also criminal allegations should be publicized, but also Mahler couldn't do anything because he didn't have any evidence to publicize that would support his claims, because he decided to not even start recording Chase after Chase began lying to him and changing his story, but that doesn't matter, it's Southpaw's fault anyway that Mahler didn't record that call. This is the exact type of incoherent troll quote-unquote logic that Jeb and company have operated on this entire time. And despite just how much cognitive dissonance it required in order to latch onto their framing of events, 1.13, they would not let go. And that is where we are going to end the reading for today. I have been Mac with some cheese, and this was Excuses, Cope, Untruths, and Manipulation by Southpaw. Oh, there's a lot left to go.
Choose wisely. One will give you eternal life, and the other, Dr. Pepper. You weak son of a bitch!